An orphan black boy prays with an elderly man at the hospital, but the next day, a lawyer gives him a letter that changes everything. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Marcus straightened the two long sleeves of his orphanage uniform, his small fingers trembling slightly as they tugged at the frayed cuffs. The sterile hallway of St. Mary's Hospital stretched before him, the scent of antiseptic sharp in his nostrils. Under his arm, he clutched a homemade Christmas card that had taken him hours to create. Layers of construction paper carefully glued together, adorned with a crooked star made from aluminum foil he'd salvaged from the kitchen. The nurse at the station glanced up, her lips curving into a familiar smile when she spotted him. "He's been asking about you all morning," she said, her voice warm with affection. Marcus nodded, swallowing the lump that had formed in his throat. He'd been visiting Mr. Joseph weekly for almost 4 months now, but today felt different. Perhaps it was the Christmas decorations hanging limply from the ceiling, or maybe the way the elderly volunteer who usually drove him had whispered, "Be extra kind today, dear," when dropping him off. Through the waiting room window, Marcus watched families walking along the street outside, mothers holding children's hands, fathers hoisting little ones onto shoulders. Normal families. Real families. The kind Marcus had stopped wishing for after 6 years in the system. "You can go in now, sweetheart," the nurse called, breaking his reverie. Marcus approached room 307 with measured steps. The door was partially open, and he could see Mr. Joseph's thin form beneath the blankets. His skin seemed more translucent today, stretched tight across his cheekbones. The sight made Marcus's heart stutter. Mr. Joseph looked worse than last week. "Is that my favorite visitor I hear shuffling about?" The old man's voice was reedy, but carried a strength that contradicted his frail appearance. "It's me, Mr. Joseph," Marcus confirmed, stepping fully into the room. "I made you something." Joseph's eyes lit up, crinkling at the corners, as he beckoned Marcus closer. The boy approached the bed, extending the handmade card with an anxious smile. "I brought you a Christmas card. I know it's still 2 weeks away, but Mrs. Patel, she's the director at St. Catherine's. She said I might not be able to come next week, because there are some couples visiting the orphanage and—" "Come here, son," Joseph interrupted, extending a trembling hand. Despite his weakness, his grip was surprisingly firm when Marcus placed his smaller hand within it. "Let's pray together today." Marcus nodded, bowing his head as he had done during each of their visits. It had felt strange at first. The orphanage wasn't particularly religious, but he'd grown to appreciate these quiet moments with Mr. Joseph. Today, though, the old man's words seemed different, weighted with an urgency that made Marcus's chest tighten. "Lord," Joseph began, his voice steadier now, "watch over this child. Guide him through the changes that are coming. Help him see that family can be found in the most unexpected places. Give him the strength to forgive, to understand, and to let love into his heart again." Marcus opened one eye, peeking at Joseph. This wasn't their usual prayer about gratitude and healing. The old man continued, words about reunion and blood ties flowing from his lips, phrases Marcus couldn't fully comprehend. "Prepare his heart for the journey ahead," Joseph whispered, a single tear tracking down his wrinkled cheek. "And help those who love him to have the courage to tell him the truth." When they finished, Marcus pulled his hand away gently. "Mr. Joseph, you're scaring me," he admitted, his voice small in the quiet room. "It sounds like you're saying goodbye." Joseph smiled, the expression gentle but tinged with sorrow. "I'm merely preparing you, son. Sometimes answers come in ways we don't expect." The old man reached for the card then, opening it with reverent care. Inside, Marcus had written a simple message. "Thank you for being my friend when I needed one. Merry Christmas, Mr. Joseph." Around the words, he'd drawn a border of musical notes. Joseph had once mentioned he used to play piano. and small stars. "This is beautiful, Marcus," Joseph said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll treasure it." They spent the rest of the visit as they always did, Joseph telling stories about his youth, Marcus sharing small details about life at the orphanage. But something felt off, as if every word carried a double meaning Marcus couldn't decipher. When the nurse appeared to inform them that visiting hours were ending, Joseph held Marcus's hand one last time. "Remember what I've taught you about prayers," he said earnestly. "They don't always get answered right away or in the way we expect, but they're never wasted." Marcus nodded, though confusion clouded his features. At the doorway, he turned back. "I'll see you next week, Mr. Joseph. Maybe, if those couples don't pick me." He tried to sound nonchalant, but the tremble in his voice betrayed him. "God has plans for you, Marcus, greater than you can imagine." The walk back through the hallway felt longer than usual. As Marcus turned the corner toward the exit, he collided with a tall man in an expensive suit. The impact sent the boy stumbling backward. "I'm sorry, sir," Marcus apologized automatically, head lowered as he'd been taught when addressing adults. The man didn't respond immediately. When Marcus glanced up, he found himself caught in an intense stare. The stranger's eyes, dark brown, almost black, studied his face with unsettling interest. "No harm done," the man finally replied, his voice carefully controlled. "Be more careful next time." Something about the encounter left Marcus uneasy as he hurried to the lobby, where Mrs. Klein, the orphanage volunteer, waited to drive him back. During the ride, he stared out the window at the Christmas decorations adorning shop windows, wondering why families always seemed to want the little ones, the babies. Nobody wanted an 11-year-old boy with unruly hair and knobby knees. Back at St. Catherine's Home for Children, Marcus dodged the usual chaos of the common room and slipped upstairs to the dormitory he shared with 5 other boys. His bed was neatly made, one of many habits he'd developed to avoid giving the staff any reason to be disappointed in him. He sat cross-legged on the thin mattress, replaying Mr. Joseph's strange prayer in his mind. What changes was he talking about? What truth needed courage to tell? Outside, darkness fell early as December days shortened. Marcus watched the first few snowflakes drift past the window, pressing his palm against the cold glass. For reasons he couldn't articulate, he felt as though something significant had shifted in his world today. Like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air grows heavy with anticipation. Sleep came fitfully that night, his dreams filled with fragments of Mr. Joseph's words and the stranger's penetrating gaze. Morning brought the usual routine. Breakfast in the noisy dining hall, chores, 2 hours of tutoring with the other children who struggled in regular school. Marcus was erasing the whiteboard after their math lesson when Mrs. Patel appeared in the doorway, her normally cheerful face unusually solemn. "Marcus," she called softly, "would you come to my office, please?" His stomach dropped. Being summoned to the director's office rarely meant good news. Had something happened to Mr. Joseph? Or worse, had he done something wrong without realizing it? He followed Mrs. Patel down the corridor, his mind racing through possible scenarios. When they reached her office, the door was already open. Sitting in one of the visitor chairs was the man from the hospital, the one he'd bumped into. Up close, Marcus could see the expensive cut of his suit, the polished shoes, the leather briefcase resting against his chair. "This is Mr. Thomas Richardson," Mrs. Patel explained, gesturing for Marcus to take the chair beside the stranger. "He's an attorney." Marcus sat gingerly, perched on the edge of the seat. Mr. Richardson cleared his throat, producing a sealed envelope from his briefcase. Marcus recognized his name, written on the front in elegant handwriting. "Marcus," said Mrs. Patel with an expression the boy had never seen before, "Mr. Richardson has news about your family." Marcus froze in the chair, unable to process the words he'd just heard. Family? The concept felt foreign after 6 years in the system, like a language he'd once known but had long forgotten. My family? He managed to whisper, his voice barely audible. Mr. Richardson nodded, his expression professionally composed yet somehow gentle. I understand this must be shocking for you, Marcus. He slid the envelope across Mrs. Patel's desk. This contains documents that will explain everything, but I believe I should deliver the most important news personally. Marcus stared at the envelope, his name written in elegant cursive. His fingers trembled as he reached for it, barely registering its weight in his hands. I'm afraid I must inform you, Mr. Richardson continued, his voice softening, that your grandfather, Joseph Williams, passed away in the early hours of this morning. The envelope slipped from Marcus's fingers, landing soundlessly on the carpet. The room seemed to tilt around him. My grandfather? He stammered, looking between Mrs. Patel and the lawyer. Mr. Joseph was my grandfather? Mrs. Patel moved to his side, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. Marcus, breathe, she instructed gently. Mr. Richardson retrieved the fallen envelope. Joseph Williams was indeed your maternal grandfather. He had been searching for you for 6 years, ever since your mother's passing. My mother? Marcus repeated numbly. 6 years of imagining who she might have been, what she might have looked like. And all this time, Mr. Joseph had known. The contents of this envelope include legal documents confirming your relation, photographs, and details of Mr. Williams' will, the lawyer explained. You are his sole heir, Marcus. But why didn't he tell me? The question burst from him, raw with hurt and confusion. All those visits, all those prayers, why keep it a secret? That's something only Joseph could fully explain, Mr. Richardson responded. But he left letters that might help you understand his reasoning. Mrs. Patel squeezed Marcus's shoulder. We've already begun the paperwork for your transfer of guardianship, she said quietly. Mr. Richardson has informed us that you have family willing to take you in. Family? Marcus echoed, the word still feeling strange on his tongue. Your aunt, Elaine Williams, the lawyer confirmed. Joseph's daughter and your mother's sister. She's been notified and is preparing for your arrival. Back in his dormitory, Marcus sat cross-legged on his bed, the contents of the envelope spread before him. Birth certificates, legal documents, and photographs. So many photographs. His fingers trembled as he picked up a picture of a young woman with curly hair like his own, her smile bright and familiar somehow. According to the caption written on the back, this was Catherine Williams, his mother. He traced her features with a fingertip, searching for himself in her face. Same nose, same eyebrows, same curl pattern in their hair. This woman had carried him, given birth to him, perhaps loved him, and he remembered nothing of her. Another photo showed a much younger Joseph standing beside Catherine at what appeared to be her college graduation. The sight of Mr. Joseph, his grandfather, looking healthy and strong, made Marcus's chest ache. All those hospital visits, he'd been sitting beside family without knowing it. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Patel entered, her expression sympathetic. The funeral is tomorrow, she said softly. Mr. Richardson will take you. We've packed a bag with your things. Marcus nodded mutely, still staring at the photograph of his mother. Marcus, Mrs. Patel continued, sitting beside him on the bed. I know this is overwhelming, but finding family, real family, that's something many children here dream about. But why didn't he tell me? Marcus asked again, the question that kept circling in his mind. He was dying all this time and never said a word about being my grandfather. Mrs. Patel sighed. Adults sometimes make complicated decisions for reasons that seem right to them at the time. Maybe he was protecting you somehow, or himself. Perhaps you'll find answers at the funeral. The funeral home was larger than Marcus had expected, filled with people he'd never seen before, but who apparently were his family. He stood awkwardly beside the open casket, staring down at Joseph's peaceful face. The man looked different somehow, more dignified in his suit than in the hospital gown Marcus had always seen him in. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus whispered to the still form, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "All that time we had together." "He had his reasons," came Mr. Richardson's voice from behind him. The lawyer approached, standing beside Marcus at the casket. "Your grandfather was a complex man, but everything he did was motivated by love." Marcus turned away from the casket, scanning the room filled with strangers in dark clothing. "These people are all my family?" "Extended family, yes. Cousins, second cousins, old friends of your grandfather's." A woman in her early 40s approached hesitantly, her steps measured and uncertain. Marcus recognized Joseph's kind eyes in her face immediately, though hers were red-rimmed from crying. "Marcus," she said, her voice slightly hoarse, "I'm Elaine, your aunt." Something in Marcus recoiled instinctively. 6 years of disappointed hopes at the orphanage had built walls around his heart that wouldn't easily come down. "Where were you all this time?" The words escaped harsher than he'd intended, but he couldn't take them back. Elaine paled visibly, her hands clutching her purse strap tighter. "I didn't know about you," she explained, her voice strained. "I lost contact with my sister, your mother, years before you were born. Dad only discovered your existence when he found birth certificates among her belongings after she passed away, but by then, you had already disappeared into the system." An elderly woman with silver hair approached, interrupting their conversation. "So this is the boy?" she asked, examining Marcus with undisguised scrutiny. "Doesn't look much like a Williams." The comment hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. The weight of being a stranger in his own family suddenly felt overwhelming. Without a word, he turned and walked swiftly away, finding refuge in a small bathroom near the back of the funeral home. He locked the door behind him, sliding down against it until he sat on the cold tile floor, breathing hard as tears threatened to spill. A few minutes later, a gentle knock came at the door. "Marcus." "It's me, Elaine. I've brought something you might want to see." He hesitated before rising to unlock the door. Elaine stood there holding a worn wooden box. "These are photographs of your mother, and some letters she wrote to you before she passed away. Joseph kept them all these years." Marcus accepted the box, opening it carefully. On top lay a photograph of the same woman from earlier, but this time, she was holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. His breath caught in his throat. That baby was him. As he shifted the photograph, an envelope slipped out, landing on the floor between them. It was addressed simply, "To my son." The date written in the corner was from 6 years ago, the day before his mother died. Anger surged through him, hot and sharp. "He had this the whole time," Marcus exclaimed, his voice rising. "All those months talking to me at the hospital, he knew. Why make me believe he was just some lonely old man? Marcus, he—" "No!" he interrupted, throwing the box down in frustration. Photographs and envelopes scattered across the bathroom floor as he pushed past Elaine, rushing out of the funeral home into the cold December air. He had no destination in mind, just an overwhelming need to escape the suffocating weight of revelations and strangers claiming to be family. Marcus found himself on the wide stone steps leading down to the street, where he sat huddled against the biting cold, watching his breath form clouds in the air. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the funeral home's manicured lawn, when Mr. Richardson found him. "You've been out here for quite some time," the lawyer observed, lowering himself to sit beside Marcus on the steps. "You must be freezing." Marcus shrugged, too numb, physically and emotionally, to respond. "Your grandfather left something else for you," Mr. Richardson said after a moment of silence, producing another envelope from his coat pocket. "He instructed me to give this to you only if you reacted exactly as you did." Marcus frowned, accepting the envelope with stiff fingers. Inside was a page torn from a journal, dated the day they first met. Today I met my grandson for the first time. He doesn't know who I am, and perhaps that's better for now. Cancer won't give me much time, and I don't want him to love me out of obligation. On the back of the page was a hospital note that made Marcus's heart constrict. Doctor gave me 2 months. I found Marcus too late. As Marcus stared at the last sentence, everything shifted into painful clarity. Joseph had found him when he was already dying. Each visit, each conversation, each shared prayer had been precious, not only because they were moments stolen from an uncertain future, but because they were the only ones they would ever have. Opening the envelope further, a hospital note fell onto his lap. Doctor gave me 2 months. I found Marcus too late. A week after the funeral, Marcus stood in the doorway of his new bedroom, duffel bag clutched tightly in one hand, Joseph's journal in the other. Elaine hovered anxiously behind him, watching as he took in the freshly painted blue walls, the neatly made bed with a navy comforter, and a bookshelf stocked with titles that might appeal to an 11-year-old boy. "I hope you like it," she said, her voice carrying a forced cheerfulness. "We can change anything that doesn't suit you." Marcus stepped into the room, placing his bag on the bed. "You didn't need to do all this," he murmured, running his fingers along the smooth wood of the desk. "I don't know how long I'll be staying." The hurt that flashed across Elaine's face was unmistakable, but Marcus couldn't help the defensive wall he'd built. Years at St. Catherine's had taught him that families were temporary, foster placements that lasted weeks or months before he was returned like defective merchandise. "This is your home now, Marcus. For forever," Elaine replied softly, lingering in the doorway as if afraid to intrude further. "Dinner will be ready in about an hour. Come down when you're ready." Once alone, Marcus unpacked his meager belongings, a few well-worn clothes, a dog-eared copy of The Hobbit that Mrs. Patel had given him, and the precious collection of items from Joseph. He placed the journal and the pocket watch on the nightstand, positioning them carefully as if arranging a shrine. The house was quiet, in a way the orphanage never was. No children shouting, no staff members calling out instructions, no television blaring in the common room. Just silence, interrupted occasionally by the distant sounds of Elaine moving around the kitchen downstairs. That night, dinner was a painful exercise in awkwardness. Marcus pushed food around his plate while Elaine attempted conversation, asking about books he enjoyed and subjects he liked in school. His responses were monosyllabic, not out of rudeness, but from the sheer exhaustion of processing everything that had happened. "I'm a history professor at the university," Elaine offered when the silence stretched too long. "Ancient civilizations, primarily, if you ever need help with homework." Marcus nodded without looking up. "Thank you," he managed, then excused himself as soon as politeness allowed. Days passed in similar fashion. Elaine left for work early, leaving breakfast ready with notes about lunch options in the refrigerator. Marcus spent his days exploring the house, reading books from the shelf in his room, and studying the contents of Joseph's journal over and over, as if the answers to all his questions might materialize between the lines. He discovered that Elaine had been collecting newspaper clippings about local schools, carefully arranging them on the kitchen table alongside enrollment forms. She bought board games that remained in their packaging, sports equipment that sat unused in the garage, and art supplies neatly organized in a basket in the living room, all silent invitations that Marcus couldn't bring himself to accept. 3 weeks after moving in, Marcus awoke from a fitful sleep, filled with dreams of Joseph. The memory of their last prayer together had haunted him since the funeral. He wandered downstairs for a glass of water, stopping short when he heard a muffled sound from the kitchen. Elaine sat at the table, shoulders shaking as she silently wept over a photograph she cradled in her hands. When she sensed his presence, she quickly wiped her eyes, offering a watery smile. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to wake you." Marcus approached hesitantly. "You didn't. I was already up." He gestured to the photograph. "Who is that?" "Your mother," Elaine explained, passing him the photo. "Today would have been her birthday." Something shifted inside Marcus. "How old would she be?" 42, Elaine replied, her voice softening. "She was 3 years younger than me." Marcus sat in the chair beside her, studying the photograph of the woman who had given him life. "What was she like?" he asked, the first unprompted question he'd initiated since arriving. The simple query seemed to transform Elaine. Her expression brightened through the remnants of tears. "Stubborn like you," she began, a genuine smile warming her features. "Talented." She had a laugh that could light up any room. That night, they shared their first dinner without the crushing weight of silence between them. Elaine told stories of their childhood. How Catherine, his mother, had once cut her own hair the night before school pictures. How she'd taught herself guitar in secret because their father thought it wasn't ladylike enough. "You have her determination," Elaine observed as she cleared their plates. "And definitely her hair." Marcus found himself smiling, a small but genuine expression that felt foreign on his face after weeks of carefully maintained neutrality. As they washed dishes together, Elaine mentioned casually, "There's a box of Dad's things in the attic I haven't gone through yet. Some old albums and documents. I thought maybe tomorrow we could look at them together, if you'd like." Marcus nodded, surprised by his own eagerness. "I'd like that." Later that night, unable to sleep and driven by a sudden compulsion, Marcus decided not to wait until morning. He crept up the narrow stairs to the attic, flashlight in hand. The space was clean, but crowded with neatly labeled boxes and old furniture draped in sheets. In the corner, he found a cardboard box marked simply, "Dad's Papers." Inside were photo albums, folders of documents, and a black leather-bound journal with Joseph Williams' name embossed in gold on the cover. Marcus settled cross-legged on the floor, opening the journal with reverent care. The first entry was dated 6 years ago, shortly after his mother's death. "Found Catherine's papers today. Birth certificate for a grandson I never knew existed. Marcus William Brooks, born to Catherine and Michael. Where is this child now? Catherine never mentioned a son. Did she keep him from me out of spite after our falling out? Or was there another reason? I've hired an investigator to find answers." Marcus's breath caught. The entries that followed chronicled a desperate search. Addresses of orphanages, names of social workers, denied requests for information. The obsession of a man determined to reunite what remained of his family. Another dead end. The system is designed to protect children, they say, but it feels like it's designed to keep families apart. I will not give up. Somewhere my grandson is waiting, perhaps believing no one is looking for him. How wrong he is. Page after page documented Joseph's search, moments of hope followed by crushing disappointments. Then, 3 months before they met, an entry that made Marcus's heart stutter. Cancer has returned. Stage 4. Doctor says I have a year at most. Please God, let me find Marcus before it's too late. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Joseph had found him when he was already dying. Each weekly visit to the hospital hadn't been a kind gesture from a lonely old man. It had been precious time stolen from the jaws of mortality. The final pages held entries about their meetings, Joseph's careful observations of his grandson, his internal debate about when and how to reveal the truth. Marcus visited again today. He's so bright, so resilient despite everything he's endured. I want to tell him who I am, but fear clouds my judgment. What if he resents me for not finding him sooner? What if the truth ruins these precious moments we have? The cancer is progressing faster than expected. I may have less time than I thought. On the last page, Marcus found a letter addressed to him. Marcus, when you read this, I will no longer be present. Forgive me for not revealing who I was from the beginning. Cancer progressed too quickly after I found you, and I feared that if you knew the truth, our moments would be tainted by anticipated grief. Instead of a dying grandfather, I wanted to be just a present friend. I hope someday you'll understand this was my way of protecting you from yet another loss." Marcus collapsed onto the attic floor, clutching the journal to his chest, finally allowing himself to truly cry for the first time since the funeral. Not the shocked tears at the lawyer's office or the angry ones at the funeral home, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the very core of his being. He cried for the grandfather he'd barely known, for the mother he couldn't remember, for the 6 years spent alone in the system, and for the fear that paralyzed him now, the terror of allowing himself to become attached to Elaine, only to lose her too. Time lost meaning as Marcus curled on his side on the dusty attic floor, the journal pressed against his heart, grief finally breaking through the walls he'd constructed. He didn't hear Elaine's footsteps on the attic stairs or notice her presence until she knelt beside him, hesitantly placing a hand on his shoulder. "Marcus?" Her voice was gentle, concerned. "I heard noises. Are you all right?" When he looked up at her through tear-blurred eyes, something in her expression shifted. Without words, she gathered him into her arms as he continued to sob, her own tears falling silently into his curls. "He knew he was dying from the very first day we met," Marcus whispered between hiccuping breaths. "Even so, he never complained, never stopped smiling." Elaine smoothed the curls from his forehead with a tenderness he hadn't allowed himself to feel since arriving. "Joseph was always like that, putting others above himself. When he found you, he said he'd been given a second chance, even knowing it would be brief." In the days that followed their shared moment in the attic, something changed between Marcus and Elaine. The wall that had kept them apart didn't crumble completely, but a door had opened, small and tentative, yet unmistakably present. "Why did he keep who he was a secret?" Marcus asked as they sat together at the breakfast table, the journal open between them. It was the question that had plagued him since the funeral, one he couldn't seem to let go. Elaine poured more orange juice into his glass before answering. "Dad wasn't trying to deceive you," she explained carefully. "He told me that he wanted to be loved for who he was, not out of obligation." "Obligation?" Marcus repeated, frowning. "He worried that if you knew he was your grandfather, you'd feel you had to love him because of blood ties. He wanted to earn your affection honestly." She smiled sadly. "And I think he was protecting you too." "From what?" "From another goodbye." Elaine's voice grew softer. "He knew he wouldn't have much time with you. Maybe he thought it would hurt less if you lost a friend rather than the grandfather you'd just found." Marcus considered this, turning the worn pocket watch between his fingers. He'd taken to carrying it everywhere, a tangible connection to Joseph. "It still hurt," he finally said. "I know," Elaine replied. "Loss always does." That afternoon, they began the daunting task of sorting through Joseph's belongings. While Elaine handled the practical matters, bills, legal documents, and correspondence, Marcus was entrusted with the personal items, photographs, keepsakes, and mementos that told the story of his family's history. As they worked side by side in Joseph's former study, Marcus found himself asking questions about his mother that he'd never had anyone to ask before. Elaine answered each one patiently, filling in the blanks of his history with stories both joyful and bittersweet. "She was an incredible musician," Elaine told him, passing a photograph of a teenage Catherine holding a guitar. "Could pick up any instrument and play it beautifully within days." Was I like her?" Marcus asked hesitantly. "In so many ways," Elaine confirmed with a smile. "You have her determination, her curls, and definitely her eyebrows." Marcus ran a finger over his thick eyebrows self-consciously, and for the first time since arriving, He laughed, a short, surprised sound that seemed to brighten the entire room. The discovery of the hand-carved wooden box came later that evening. It was tucked away in the back of Joseph's closet, its surface polished from years of handling. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay an antique pocket watch and a note in Joseph's familiar handwriting. For my grandson Marcus, when he's ready to understand that some things need time to make sense. He planned everything, didn't he? Marcus asked, turning the watch over in his hands. The engraving on the back read simply, "Time reveals truth." Elaine nodded, her eyes misting slightly. When Dad found you, he knew he wouldn't have time to build the relationship he dreamed of having with his grandson. So he did what he could with the time he had, created moments you would remember, prepared me to care for you, and left these small pieces of himself for you to discover gradually. Marcus wound the watch carefully, listening to its steady ticking. "It still works," he said, something like wonder in his voice. "That watch belonged to your great-grandfather," Elaine explained. "Dad received it when he turned 18. He always said time was the most precious inheritance." As January turned to February, the house gradually became a home. Elaine enrolled Marcus in the local middle school, where he cautiously began to make connections with classmates. Though still reserved, he no longer carried himself with the defensive posture of someone expecting rejection at every turn. One evening, as Marcus worked through math homework at the kitchen table, Elaine placed a mug of hot chocolate beside him and sat down with her own steaming cup. "I found something today," she said, sliding an old newspaper clipping across the table. "It's from when your mother won a regional music competition. She was about your age." Marcus studied the grainy photograph of a young girl with his same wild curls, clutching a violin and beaming at the camera. "She looks so happy," he observed. "She was," Elaine confirmed. "I remember Dad driving us 3 hours to that competition because she was so determined to participate." Marcus sipped his hot chocolate thoughtfully. "Was he a good father? Before whatever happened between them?" Elaine considered the question carefully. "He tried his best. He was strict sometimes, traditional in his expectations. That's partly why he and Catherine clashed. She was so free-spirited. When she left home after high school, they barely spoke for years." Her expression turned regretful. They only reconciled when she became ill. By then, it was almost too late. "Like with me," Marcus said quietly. "Yes," Elaine agreed. Dad seemed to have a pattern of finding the people he loved when time was running short. 3 months after moving in with Elaine, on what would have been Joseph's birthday, Marcus asked if they could visit the cemetery. The March day was crisp but sunny, the first hints of spring visible in tiny buds on the trees surrounding the neatly maintained grounds. Marcus stood before Joseph's headstone, the Christmas card he'd made, the one he never got to deliver, clutched in his hand. Elaine waited a respectful distance away, giving him privacy for this moment. "I think I understand now why you asked us to pray on that last day," Marcus said to the grave, his voice steady despite the emotion building in his chest. "You knew it was our goodbye, but you also knew it wouldn't be the end." He placed the card carefully against the stone, weighing it down with a small rock to prevent the breeze from carrying it away. The crooked star he'd fashioned from aluminum foil had tarnished slightly, but the message inside remained the same. "Thank you for being my friend when I needed one. I'm learning about our family," Marcus continued his one-sided conversation. "Elaine's been telling me about Mom, and about you when you were younger. I wish—" His voice caught briefly. "I wish we'd had more time, but I'm grateful for what we got." When he rejoined Elaine by the car, she handed him a tissue without comment, a small gesture of understanding that meant more than words could express. As they drove home, Marcus noticed an envelope in the glove compartment when Elaine reached for her sunglasses. He immediately recognized Joseph's elegant handwriting on the front. "What's this?" he asked, pointing to the envelope. Elaine glanced over, her expression surprised. "I have no idea. Where did you find it?" "Right there in the glove box." Elaine pulled over to the shoulder of the road, taking the envelope with a puzzled frown. "It's addressed to both of us," she noted, carefully opening it. Inside was a single sheet with instructions for a treasure hunt throughout the house, beginning with the old oak tree in the backyard. The note was dated just 2 weeks before Joseph's death. "He set up a treasure hunt?" Marcus asked incredulously. "For us to find today?" "Apparently so," Elaine replied, a mixture of amusement and emotion in her voice. "Dad always did love his surprises." The moment they arrived home, Marcus raced to the backyard, Elaine following more slowly behind. The old oak tree stood majestically at the far corner of the property, its branches still bare from winter, but showing signs of the coming spring. Following Joseph's cryptic instructions, Marcus began digging between 2 prominent roots. 6 inches down, his fingers touched something solid, a small metal time capsule. He brushed away the dirt with trembling hands and opened it carefully. Inside were old photographs of his mother at his age, playing beneath this same tree, along with a note from Joseph. "Marcus, some roots are too deep to be seen, but they are what sustain us when storms come." Also in the capsule was a small journal that appeared to belong to his mother when she was 12. The first page was marked with a bookmark, and Joseph had added a note. "She was dreaming of her future at your age, too." Marcus sat in the grass, turning the pages reverently, reading his mother's childhood thoughts with a sense of wonder. Elaine settled beside him, her own eyes wide with surprise. "I had no idea he'd done this," she admitted. "This was Catherine's secret journal. I never even knew it existed." "He must have been planning this for months," Marcus said, still marveling at Joseph's foresight. "Even when he was sick, he was thinking about how to connect us all." In the weeks that followed, they discovered other small treasures hidden throughout the house, each revealing another piece of their family history, carefully preserved by Joseph for Marcus to discover when he was ready. Under a loose floorboard, in what was now Marcus's bedroom, they found a collection of family recipes with notes about which ones had been Catherine's favorites. Behind a panel in the hallway bookcase was a small box containing the award medal from Catherine's music competition, along with a cassette recording of her performance. Each discovery was like another thread woven into the tapestry of Marcus's understanding of himself and his place in this family. Joseph had created a bridge between past and present, ensuring that even in his absence, Marcus would never feel truly disconnected from his roots again. On the first anniversary of Joseph's death, Marcus woke with a sense of purpose. He made his way downstairs early, pulling out ingredients from the refrigerator and pantry. By the time Elaine appeared, bleary-eyed in her bathrobe, he had prepared a simple but earnest breakfast: scrambled eggs that were slightly overcooked, toast with jam and orange juice, all arranged on the table alongside a small wrapped package. "What's this?" she asked, clearly touched by the gesture. "Open it," he replied, nervous but determined. Inside was a picture frame holding 2 photographs side by side, one of Marcus with Joseph in the hospital during one of their visits, and a recent one of him with Elaine on his first day at the new school. "I thought we could start our own family album," he said shyly. Elaine embraced him, unable to hold back tears. "You know," Marcus reflected as he sat down for breakfast, "I think Grandpa Joseph knew exactly what he was doing when he decided not to tell me who he was right away." "How so?" Marcus smiled, touching the photograph. "He didn't want me to love him out of obligation, just because we shared blood. He wanted us to connect as people first, just like you and I eventually did." That afternoon, as they placed fresh flowers on Joseph's grave, Marcus whispered a prayer of gratitude. When he closed his eyes, he could almost feel Joseph's hand upon his, as it had been that last day in the hospital, and finally understood what the old man had meant. Important things indeed were about to happen. Not just the discovery of a lost family, but the understanding that family extends beyond blood. It's a choice made daily, in each gesture of love. While tucking the pocket watch safely in his pocket, Marcus noticed something he hadn't seen before. When held at just the right angle, the light revealed tiny engraved coordinates on the inner case alongside a date. For when the leaves turn golden. Every morning before school, Marcus would check the weather forecast on Elaine's tablet, scrolling eagerly through the weekly predictions. September had given way to October, and October was surrendering to November's chill, yet the skies remained stubbornly clear. No hint of the snowfall he'd been anticipating since discovering the coordinates and cryptic message on the back of his mother's photograph. Open only on the first day of snow. "Looking at the weather again?" Elaine asked, placing a bowl of oatmeal in front of him. "Winter will come when it's ready, not a moment sooner." Marcus sighed, setting the tablet aside. "I know, it's just, what if it's something important? Something about my dad, maybe?" Elaine's expression softened. She had grown accustomed to Marcus's growing fixation with Joseph's elaborate treasure hunt, understanding that each discovery helped him piece together the family history that had been kept from him for so long. "Your grandfather was nothing if not patient," she reminded him gently. "He designed this journey knowing you'd need time between discoveries. Maybe there's wisdom in his timing." School had become less of an ordeal as autumn progressed. Marcus still kept largely to himself, but the defensive posture that had marked his first weeks had gradually relaxed. His teachers noted improvements in his concentration and participation, though he remained quieter than most children his age. It was during lunch period on a particularly cold November day that Marcus first noticed Theodore Kim sitting alone, a book propped against his milk carton. Something about the boy's solitude felt familiar. "Mind if I sit here?" Marcus asked, hovering beside the empty chair. Theodore glanced up, his expression guarded yet hopeful. "Free country," he shrugged, moving his backpack to make room. Marcus sat down, unpacking the lunch Elaine had prepared. They ate in companionable silence for several minutes before Theodore spoke again. "You're the new kid. Marcus, right? The one living with his aunt?" Marcus tensed slightly. "How'd you know about my aunt?" "Small school," Theodore replied simply. "Plus, my uncle is the same. Guardian, I mean. My parents died in a car accident when I was 7. The matter-of-fact way Theodore delivered this information caught Marcus off guard. There was no fishing for sympathy, no awkward pauses, just a simple statement of his reality. "I never really knew my parents," Marcus found himself saying. "My mom died when I was 5, and I just found out about my family this year." Theodore nodded thoughtfully. "That's rough. Different kind of rough than mine, but still rough." By the end of lunch period, Marcus had learned that Theodore, who preferred to be called Theo, lived with his uncle, played clarinet in the school band, and shared his interest in fantasy novels. It was the most effortless conversation he'd had with anyone his age in years. When Elaine picked him up after school, she couldn't hide her surprise at seeing Marcus walking out with another boy, both of them talking animatedly. "Who's your friend?" she asked carefully once they were in the car, trying not to sound too eager and potentially embarrass him. "Theo," Marcus replied with a casual shrug that couldn't quite conceal his satisfaction. "He lives with his uncle, too. His parents died when he was little." "I see," Elaine said, stealing a glance at her nephew's face. There was a lightness there that she hadn't seen before. "Would you like to invite him over sometime?" 2 weeks later, Theo sat cross-legged on Marcus's bedroom floor, examining the pocket watch with undisguised fascination, while Marcus explained Joseph's elaborate posthumous treasure hunt. "So your grandpa hid all these clues before he died?" Theo asked, carefully returning the watch. "That's some serious planning." "He knew he was dying," Marcus explained, retrieving the photograph with the snow day instructions. I think he wanted to make sure I'd still feel connected to him and my mom even after he was gone. Theo studied the cryptic note. And you have no idea what's waiting when it snows? Marcus shook his head. Could be anything. So far, there have been old photographs, letters, even recordings of my mom playing violin. What about your dad? Theo asked, picking up the faded image of the young man with the guitar that Marcus kept on his nightstand. Have you found much about him? Not really, Marcus admitted. Just that his name was Michael Reed, and he was a musician. Elaine didn't know him well. From downstairs, Elaine called that dinner was ready. As they headed down, Marcus couldn't help noticing how Elaine tried, perhaps too hard, to make Theo feel welcome, offering seconds before they'd finished firsts and asking just a few too many questions. But he appreciated the effort, recognizing in her enthusiasm just how much his friendship with Theo meant to her as well. After dinner, as they worked on science homework at the kitchen table, Marcus found himself sharing Joseph's clues more openly with Theo, discussing theories about what might be hidden and where. It's like your grandpa created this whole mystery for you to solve, Theo observed. Like he's still teaching you things even though he's gone. I never thought about it that way, Marcus replied thoughtfully, but I think you're right. When Theo's uncle came to pick him up, Marcus felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in a long time. The simple pleasure of having a friend, someone who understood parts of his life without explanation. December arrived with biting winds but stubbornly clear skies. Christmas decorations appeared throughout the neighborhood, and Elaine brought down boxes of ornaments from the attic. Among them, Marcus discovered another small package with Joseph's handwriting. For Marcus's first Christmas at home. Inside was an ornament shaped like a pocket watch, with the words, "Time reveals truth," engraved on its surface. The same phrase from his grandfather's watch. He really did think of everything, Marcus whispered, hanging it carefully on a prominent branch of their tree. School let out for winter break, and still no snow came. Marcus continued checking the forecast daily, growing increasingly impatient. What secret was Joseph saving for the first snowfall? Was it something about his father? The questions circled endlessly in his mind. On the morning of December 23rd, Marcus woke to an unusual stillness. The quality of light filtering through his curtains seemed different somehow. Softer, more diffuse. He rushed to the window and pulled back the curtains to reveal a world transformed. Everything, the yard, the street, the rooftops, lay beneath a pristine blanket of white. The first snow had finally arrived. His heart racing, Marcus grabbed the photograph with the coordinates and dressed quickly. He found Elaine already in the kitchen, cradling a mug of coffee as she gazed out at the snow-covered garden. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said, turning as he entered. One look at his face told her everything. "The coordinates. It's time, isn't it?" Marcus nodded, barely able to contain his excitement. "Will you help me?" Together they bundled up against the cold and ventured outside. The coordinates led them to the attic, specifically to measurements from a particular corner beam. Following Joseph's precise instructions, Marcus counted floorboards, measured distances, and finally located a small access panel cleverly concealed in the roof structure. Inside the hidden compartment was a wooden box bearing Joseph's initials. With trembling fingers, Marcus lifted it out and carried it to his bedroom, where he could open it privately. The box contained a collection of letters, yellowed with age and carefully arranged by date. The first was addressed to Joseph, written in a flowing feminine script that Marcus recognized from other discoveries as his mother's handwriting. "Dear Dad," it began. "I'm not sure how to tell you this, but I'm pregnant. Michael doesn't know yet. He's on tour with the band in Europe." Marcus's breath caught. This was his mother writing to Joseph about her pregnancy, about him. He read through letter after letter, each revealing another piece of the puzzle that was his parents' relationship. His mother had met Michael Reed at a music festival where she was performing classical violin and he was playing with an indie rock band. Their worlds couldn't have been more different, but they'd fallen deeply in love. When Catherine discovered she was pregnant, Michael was touring internationally. Before she could tell him about the baby, they'd had a major argument over the phone about his constant traveling, ending with a painful breakup. "I can't bring myself to tell him about the baby," one letter confessed. "Not like this. Not as some kind of trap to make him come back. When he returns from tour, I'll find a way to tell him face to face." But according to the final letters, Michael never returned. His band extended their European tour, then booked shows in Asia. Catherine's pregnancy progressed, and her pride prevented her from reaching out. "Maybe it's better this way," she'd written in one of the last letters. "My son deserves someone who chooses to be in his life, not someone who feels obligated." Marcus sat back against his bed, the letters spread around him, a complex mixture of emotions churning inside. His father hadn't abandoned him. He'd never even known he existed. With a determined expression, he gathered the letters and went downstairs to find Elaine. "Did you know about these?" he asked, holding up the letters. Elaine shook her head, her expression softening as she recognized what he was holding. "I knew Catherine was writing to Dad during her pregnancy, but I never read the letters." "Dad never knew about me," Marcus said, the word strange on his tongue. "He didn't leave us. He just never knew." Elaine sat beside him on the sofa. "Catherine was always fiercely independent. I can imagine her thinking she was protecting both of you by keeping it to herself. But what if—" Marcus hesitated. "What if he would have wanted to know? What if he still doesn't know I exist?" "That's possible," Elaine acknowledged carefully. "Your mother passed away suddenly. There might not have been anyone to tell him." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. Beneath his pillow was a photograph he'd found among the letters, a young man with curly hair like his own, smiling broadly as he held a guitar. On the back, his mother had written simply, "Michael at Riverbank Festival where we met." He studied the image in the dim light from his bedside lamp, searching for resemblances. Same curls, similar jawline, identical dimple in the right cheek when smiling. When the house grew quiet, and he was certain Elaine was asleep, Marcus crept downstairs to the computer in the living room. With trembling fingers, he typed, "Michael Reed Musician," into the search engine. His heart nearly stopped when the results loaded. There, among the links, was a video thumbnail showing a man with familiar features. Marcus clicked on it, turning the volume low. The video was from a small venue performance just last year. An older version of the man from the photograph sat on a stool, guitar in hand, introducing a song to a modest audience. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. Beneath his pillow was a photograph he'd found among the letters, a young man with curly hair like his own, smiling broadly as he held a guitar. On the back, his mother had written simply, "Michael at Riverbank Festival, where we met." That night, searching secretly on the computer, Marcus typed "Michael Reed Musician," and his heart raced when a video appeared on screen, showing a man with his same curls and smile. Marcus couldn't tear his eyes away from the video playing on the computer screen. He watched it again and again, studying every detail of Michael Reed's face. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how he ran his fingers through his curls before starting to play, the familiar tilt of his head when he concentrated. These weren't just random similarities. They were genetic echoes, physical traits passed from father to son. "That's definitely him," he whispered to himself, pausing the video on a close-up frame. Side by side with the old photograph from his mother's letters, there was no question. This was the same man, just 20 years older. The following morning at school, Marcus could barely focus on his lessons. During lunch, he pulled Theo aside to a quiet corner of the cafeteria, glancing around to ensure no one was listening, before pulling out his phone. "I found him," Marcus said, his voice low with excitement, as he pressed play on the video he'd saved. Theo leaned closer, eyes widening as he watched. "Whoa, He looks just like you. Or you look just like him. That's crazy." "He's still performing," Marcus continued, switching to a web page he'd bookmarked. "He plays at small venues mostly, but he has his own website. Look, he's got shows scheduled next month in Riverdale." "That's only 2 hours away," Theo observed, scrolling through the tour dates. "So what are you going to do, tell Elaine?" Marcus hesitated, biting his lower lip. "I don't know. What if she tries to stop me from contacting him? Or what if she insists on doing it her way? This is my dad, Theo." "But she might be able to help," Theo reasoned. "Adults have cars and money and stuff we need." "I just want to think it through first," Marcus replied. "Figure out the right approach before I tell her." That evening, Marcus spent hours researching everything he could find about Michael Reed. Social media accounts showed a man in his 40s who still performed regularly, though he never achieved the stardom he might have once pursued. He taught guitar lessons, produced music for independent artists, and lived in a city about 3 hours away. There was no evidence of a wife or children in any of his posts. The most important discovery came from a recent interview on a local music blog. "I've settled down somewhat, teaching and producing more than touring these days. Never had a family of my own. That's probably my biggest regret. The road life when I was younger. It cost me the one serious relationship that might have led somewhere." Marcus read those lines over and over, a strange mixture of hope and anxiety building inside him. Was he talking about Marcus's mother? Did he ever wonder what happened to her? Each time Elaine passed his bedroom door, Marcus quickly switched screens, pretending to work on homework. His search felt intensely personal, something he needed to pursue on his own terms before sharing with anyone else, even Elaine, whose relationship with him had steadily strengthened over the months. The next afternoon, while searching through Joseph's study for a stapler, Marcus stumbled upon another treasure his grandfather had hidden. Behind a row of history books on a lower shelf, he discovered a hollowed-out volume containing a small leather journal. A note in Joseph's handwriting was attached to the cover. "For when you start asking about your father." His heart racing, Marcus carried the journal to his room. Inside were entries dating back to when his mother was pregnant, recording Joseph's evolving feelings about Michael Reed and his absence from Catherine's life. The early entries were predictably harsh, a father's anger at the man who had broken his daughter's heart. But as the pages continued, Joseph's tone gradually shifted. "Catherine finally admitted today that she never told Michael about the baby," one entry read. "I've been blaming a man who doesn't even know he has a son. The unfairness of my anger troubles me." Later entries revealed something that made Marcus's breath catch. Joseph had actually attempted to find Michael after Catherine's death. "Hired an investigator to locate Michael Reed," Joseph wrote. "If Marcus has lost his mother, he deserves at least the chance to know his father, regardless of my personal feelings about the man." The final entry, dated just weeks before Joseph discovered Marcus at the orphanage, contained a surprising revelation. The investigator found Reed. He's still performing, teaching music in Eastland. "I made contact today but did not reveal Marcus's existence yet. The man seemed genuinely shocked and saddened to learn of Catherine's passing. He asked if she had been happy, if she had found someone else. I couldn't bring myself to tell him about his son over the phone. This news should be delivered in person, but my health is deteriorating rapidly. I must find Marcus first. One reunion at a time." Marcus closed the journal, his mind racing. Joseph had actually spoken to his father. He had planned to reunite them, but time, that ever-present adversary in Joseph's final months, had run out. During dinner that night, Marcus carefully attempted to extract more information about Michael without revealing his discoveries. "Did my mom ever talk about my dad?" he asked, trying to sound casual as he pushed peas around his plate. Elaine looked up, clearly surprised by the sudden question. "Not much to me," she admitted. "We weren't close during those years. I know they met at a music festival. He was in a band that was just starting to tour internationally. Was he a good person? Marcus pressed. Elaine considered the question thoughtfully. I only met him a couple of times. He seemed passionate about music, about life. Catherine was drawn to that intensity. She paused. Why this sudden interest? Marcus shrugged, avoiding her gaze. Just trying to complete the picture, I guess. That weekend, Theo came over to work on a science project, but their conversation quickly turned to the Michael Reed situation once they were alone in Marcus's room. I think you should write to him, Theo suggested, examining the journal entries Marcus had shown him. Not an email. Anyone could have written that. A real letter with the photo of you and your mom, maybe. Something he would recognize. What would I even say? Marcus asked, flopping back on his bed. Hi, you don't know me, but I'm your son. Pretty much, Theo said with a shrug. Sometimes the simplest approach is best. They spent the afternoon drafting possibilities, with Marcus crumpling paper after paper, finding each attempt either too formal, too accusatory, or too desperate. What if he doesn't want anything to do with me? Marcus finally voiced his deepest fear. What if he's glad he never knew? Then at least you'll know, Theo replied with the straightforward logic that characterized their friendship. Not knowing is way worse. That night, after Theo had gone home, Marcus had a vivid nightmare. He stood on a stage, spotlights blinding him as he searched the audience for a familiar face. He could hear Michael Reed's voice but couldn't locate him. When the lights finally adjusted, the seats were empty except for a single figure walking away toward the exit. Wait, Marcus called out in the dream. I'm your son. But the figure never turned, continuing through the doors and disappearing. He woke with a start, heart pounding. The fear of rejection felt so real, it left him breathless. But alongside it was a determination that had been building since discovering those letters in the snow day treasure box. He deserved to know his father, and his father deserved to know he existed. The next morning, Marcus sat at his desk with fresh paper, determination replacing anxiety. This time the words came more naturally. Dear Mr. Reed, my name is Marcus Brooks. I'm 11 years old, and I recently discovered that you are my father. My mother was Catherine Williams. She passed away when I was 5, and I've spent most of my life in an orphanage, not knowing I had any family at all. Last year, my grandfather Joseph Williams found me. He was dying of cancer, but he still spent his final months creating a treasure hunt of family memories for me to discover after he was gone. Through his clues, I learned about you. I found out that my mother never told you she was pregnant. According to her letters, you were touring with your band when she found out, and after you broke up, she decided not to tell you about me. I don't blame her, and I don't blame you for not being in my life. How could you know about someone you never knew existed? I'm attaching a photograph of my mother holding me as a baby, and a recent school photo of myself. People tell me I look like you, especially my hair and when I smile. I don't expect anything from you. I just thought you had the right to know that you have a son. If you ever want to meet me, I'm living with my Aunt Elaine, my mother's sister, in Millfield. Sincerely, Marcus Brooks. He read it over twice, making small corrections, before carefully folding it and placing it in an envelope along with the photographs. The address, found on Michael's professional website, was written in his neatest handwriting. You're really going to mail it? Theo asked the next day as they stood outside the post office, the sealed envelope in Marcus's hand. Marcus nodded, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. I need to know. Whatever happens next, at least I tried. Together they walked inside, and Marcus handed the letter to the postal worker, watching as it disappeared into a bin with dozens of other envelopes. One small piece of paper that could potentially change his life forever. Walking home, Marcus felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. The letter was beyond his control now, traveling toward a man who had no idea his life was about to be upended. "What do you think he'll do when he gets it?" Theo asked. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "Maybe nothing. Maybe he'll write back. Maybe he'll—" He stopped himself from completing the thought, from voicing the hope that had begun to take root despite his best efforts to keep expectations low. For the next 2 weeks, Marcus checked the mail the moment he got home from school, heart racing whenever he spotted an unfamiliar envelope. But no response came. "Maybe it takes longer," Theo suggested, when Marcus admitted his disappointment. "Or maybe he's processing. It's pretty huge news." "Maybe," Marcus agreed, though the seed of doubt grew larger with each passing day. Then, on a Wednesday evening 2 weeks after sending the letter, the doorbell rang during dinner. Marcus and Elaine exchanged curious glances. They rarely had unexpected visitors. "I'll get it," Marcus offered, pushing back from the table. He opened the front door to find a man in his mid-40s standing on the porch. The porch light illuminated familiar curly hair now threaded with gray, the same dimple in his right cheek as he offered an uncertain smile. In his hand, he held Marcus's letter. "Hello, Marcus," the man said simply. "I'm Michael." Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the man before him, a man whose features were both completely foreign and eerily familiar. Blood rushed in his ears as he tried to form words, but his voice failed him. "Marcus, who is it?" Elaine's voice came from behind, growing closer with each word until she stopped abruptly at his shoulder. The silence that fell between the three of them was electric, charged with shock, uncertainty, and 20 years of unanswered questions. "Michael," Elaine finally breathed, her voice barely audible. Michael shifted uncomfortably on the porch, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "I got your letter," he said, addressing the boy directly. I drove here as soon as I read it. I probably should have called first, but He trailed off, seemingly overwhelmed by the situation. "Please come in," Elaine said after another awkward pause, her tone carefully controlled as she placed a protective hand on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus stepped aside mechanically, still unable to speak as Michael entered their home. In the brighter light of the entryway, the resemblance between father and son became even more pronounced. The same set of the eyes, the identical curl pattern, the way they both stood with their weight slightly shifted to one side. The three moved to the living room, where Michael perched uncomfortably on the edge of the sofa, while Elaine and Marcus took seats across from him. The half-eaten dinner remained forgotten on the dining table. "I didn't know," Michael said finally, his voice thick with emotion as he looked directly at Marcus. "I swear to you, I had no idea Catherine was pregnant. I was touring in Europe when we broke up, and then the band continued on to Asia." He ran a hand through his graying curls, a gesture Marcus immediately recognized as his own nervous habit. 6 months on the road turned into a year, and by the time I returned to the States, I'd convinced myself it was too late to reach out to her. Michael's eyes glistened as he continued. "I never knew about you. I never knew about Catherine's passing until I got a call from Joseph a few years ago." "Joseph called you?" Elaine interrupted, her expression hardening. "When exactly was this?" "About 2 years ago," Michael replied. "He didn't mention Marcus, though. He just told me that Catherine had passed away several years earlier. We only spoke for a few minutes." "And you never thought to ask if she'd had a family? Children?" Elaine's voice had taken on an edge that Marcus had never heard before. Michael's shoulders slumped. "I asked if she'd been happy, if she'd married. Joseph said she'd remained single, devoted to her career. He never mentioned a child." His gaze returned to Marcus, who had yet to speak. "I would have come immediately if I'd known. You have to believe that." Marcus finally found his voice, though it emerged smaller than intended. "How can I believe anything about you? I don't even know you." Something in Michael's face crumpled at the words, but he nodded in understanding. That's fair. More than fair. An uncomfortable silence filled the room until Elaine spoke again, her voice carefully measured. What exactly do you want, Michael? You received a letter and drove straight here without calling. What are your intentions regarding Marcus? The directness of her question hung in the air. Marcus glanced between the adults, suddenly feeling like a spectator in his own life. I want, Michael began, then paused, clearly struggling for words. I want to know my son. I've missed 11 years. 11 years I can never get back. But if Marcus is willing, I'd like the chance to be part of his life moving forward. And how do you propose to do that? Elaine challenged. You live 3 hours away. Your career involves travel and late nights. Marcus has school, stability, a life we've been carefully rebuilding after years of uncertainty. Marcus observed the tension between them with growing discomfort. Michael's arrival had clearly reopened old wounds for Elaine, perhaps resentments dating back to her sister's heartbreak. I understand your concerns, Michael replied, maintaining a calm tone despite Elaine's clear hostility. I'm not asking to disrupt Marcus's life. I'm asking for a chance to get to know him, on whatever terms work for everyone. Marcus stood suddenly, unable to bear being talked about as if he weren't present. I'm right here, he said, his voice stronger now, and I think I should have some say in this. Both adults turned to him, momentarily chastened. You're absolutely right, Michael said. This should be your decision, Marcus. Marcus looked at the man who had unknowingly given him life, this stranger who nonetheless shared his features, his curls, his dimple. I have questions, he said simply. Anything, Michael responded earnestly. Ask me anything. Marcus hesitated, then reached for the faded photograph he'd kept on the side table, the one of young Michael with the guitar. This was in my mom's things. Was this taken at the music festival where you met? Michael's eyes widened as he took the photograph, recognition and pain mingling in his expression. Yes, he said softly. Riverbank Festival, summer of 2010. Catherine was performing with a classical quartet in the afternoon, and my band was playing the evening slot. A small smile formed at the memory. She criticized our tempo during sound check. Told me our drummer couldn't keep a consistent beat. That sounds like Catherine, Elaine remarked, her tone softening slightly despite herself. When did you know you loved her? Marcus asked, the question surprising even himself. Michael's eyes grew distant. There was a thunderstorm that night. The power went out across the festival grounds, and everyone was huddled under tents. Catherine had brought her violin to our tent for safety. By candlelight, she started playing this hauntingly beautiful piece. Bach, I think. Without planning it, I picked up my guitar and started accompanying her. His smile widened at the memory. It was like our instruments were having a conversation that we couldn't have articulated in words. By the time the piece ended, I knew I'd met someone extraordinary. Marcus found himself hanging on every word, hungry for these glimpses of his mother that he'd never had. She never told me about you, Marcus said, returning to the most painful question. The letters I found, she said she didn't want to trap you. Michael's expression crumpled. That's exactly what Catherine would think. She was fiercely independent, determined never to need anyone. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. But it wouldn't have been a trap, Marcus. It would have been a gift, the greatest gift of my life. From the corner of his eye, Marcus noticed Elaine discreetly wiping away a tear. Would you like to see? Marcus asked suddenly, rising and moving toward the corner of the room where his guitar stood, a birthday gift from Elaine months earlier. I've been learning. You play? Michael asked, his voice tinged with wonder. Marcus nodded, retrieving the instrument. Not very well yet. I've only been taking lessons for a few months. May I? Michael asked, extending his hands. Marcus handed over the guitar, watching as Michael tuned it with practiced ease, his fingers moving automatically across the strings. When he began to play, the simple melody filled the room with warmth, that seemed to temporarily suspend the tension. "You have natural technique," Michael observed, returning the guitar. "Your hand position is perfect." "My teacher says I pick things up quickly," Marcus replied, a small flush of pride coloring his cheeks. "That's from your mother," Michael said softly. "Catherine could master any piece in half the time it took others." The mention of Catherine seemed to remind Elaine of her presence. She cleared her throat. "It's getting late, and Marcus has school tomorrow." The hint wasn't subtle, and Michael nodded in understanding, rising from the sofa. "Of course, I've taken up enough of your evening." He hesitated, looking at Marcus. "Would it be all right if I stayed in town for a few days? Maybe we could spend some time together. If you want to, that is." Before Marcus could answer, Elaine interjected. "Where are you staying?" "I haven't checked in anywhere yet," Michael admitted. "I drove straight here from Eastland after getting Marcus's letter." "There's a decent hotel on Maple Street," Elaine informed him, her tone businesslike. Michael nodded, turning back to Marcus. "Would it be okay if I came by tomorrow afternoon? Maybe we could talk more?" Marcus glanced at Elaine, who gave a small nod despite her obvious reservations. "Yes," he replied. "I'd like that." As they walked Michael to the door, he suddenly turned back. "I almost forgot." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn case. "This was my first guitar pick. I've carried it as a sort of good luck charm for 20 years. He extended it toward Marcus. "I'd like you to have it." Marcus accepted the small token, turning it over in his palm. The once black surface had faded to a soft gray from years of handling. "Thank you," he said quietly. At the doorway, Michael paused one last time, his eyes moving between Elaine and Marcus. "I know this is sudden and complicated. I don't expect anything to be simple or immediate. But I want you both to know that I'm serious about being part of Marcus's life, if he'll have me." After Michael left, Elaine and Marcus stood in silence for several moments before Marcus spoke. "He seemed nice." Elaine sighed deeply. "Marcus, I want you to be careful about getting your hopes up too quickly. People can make all sorts of promises in the heat of an emotional moment." "You don't believe him?" Marcus asked, suddenly defensive. "I believe he's sincere right now," Elaine replied carefully. "But building a relationship, being consistently present in someone's life, that takes more than good intentions." She placed her hands gently on his shoulders. "Just promise me you'll take this slowly. Protect your heart a little." That night, as Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind replayed every moment of the evening's encounter. The stranger at the door, who shared his features. The stories about his mother that he'd never heard before. The way Michael's fingers had moved so naturally across the guitar strings, just as his own seemed to do. The next morning, Marcus was surprised to see Elaine already in the kitchen when he came down for breakfast, unusually early for her. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, pouring himself a bowl of cereal. "Not much," she admitted. "You?" Marcus shook his head. "It's weird. Yesterday I just had a picture, now I have an actual person." "I know it's a lot to process," Elaine said, joining him at the table. "Whatever you're feeling, excited, confused, angry, all of it, it's all valid." After school, Michael arrived precisely at the time they'd agreed upon, this time bearing his own guitar and a small amp. "I thought maybe we could play a little together," he suggested with a hesitant smile. Over the next few hours, Marcus experienced the strange, surreal joy of playing music with the father he'd never known. Michael was patient, encouraging, and clearly thrilled by every small sign of Marcus's natural talent. As they took a break, Michael pulled out his phone to show Marcus old photos of his band days, including several with Catherine that Marcus had never seen. "She was so talented," Michael said, his voice tinged with old admiration. "She could have played with any symphony in the country, but she preferred teaching, said it was more rewarding." "Did you love her?" Marcus asked suddenly. Michael's expression grew serious. Very much. Our relationship ended because I chose my career over staying in one place. It's one of the greatest regrets of my life, not knowing what might have been if I'd made different choices. The conversation drifted to Michael's current life. His work producing for independent artists, teaching guitar to students of all ages, the small but comfortable apartment he maintained in Eastland. When Elaine returned from running errands, she found them laughing together over a particularly difficult chord progression that Marcus kept fumbling. "I see you two have been busy," she observed, her expression unreadable as she set down her shopping bags. When Michael asked if he could continue being part of Marcus's life, Elaine stepped forward, her protective instinct fully engaged. "That depends on what you're willing to sacrifice this time, Michael, because he's already lost too many people." A heavy silence hung in the air, following Elaine's pointed question. Michael's face registered the impact of her words, his eyes reflecting a mixture of regret and determination. "That's fair," he finally said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "I deserve that." Marcus looked between the two adults, uncomfortable with being the center of what felt like an old, unspoken conflict. "I should go," Michael said, carefully placing his guitar back in its case. "Marcus, thank you for today. It meant more than I can express." After Michael left, Marcus turned to Elaine. "You didn't have to be so hard on him." "I need to protect you," she replied, her expression softening. "This isn't about punishing Michael. It's about making sure you don't get hurt if he decides that being a father is more difficult than he anticipated." Later that night, after Marcus had gone to bed, the muffled sounds of a conversation drifted up from the living room. Curious, he crept to the top of the stairs and recognized Michael's voice. He had returned, and he and Elaine were having what sounded like an intense but measured discussion. "I understand your concerns," Michael was saying. "I've lived a life without commitments, without having to consider how my choices affect others. But meeting Marcus changes everything." "Words are easy, Michael," Elaine responded, her tone less confrontational than earlier but still guarded. Catherine heard similar promises once. "I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago," Michael replied. "None of us are. I've spent 2 decades regretting how things ended with Catherine. I won't make the same mistake with Marcus." The conversation continued for almost an hour, their voices eventually becoming more collaborative as they discussed practical matters, how Michael might be involved in Marcus's life without disrupting the stability Elaine had worked so hard to create. Marcus returned to bed, a complex mixture of hope and anxiety swirling in his chest. He wanted so badly to believe that this unexpected development might actually work, that the father he'd never known might become a real presence in his life. 3 days later, Michael showed up with unexpected news. "I found an apartment to rent," he announced as they sat in Elaine's kitchen. "It's a small place on Oak Street, about 10 minutes from here. I've signed a 6-month lease." Marcus's eyes widened. "You're moving here? What about your work in Eastland?" "Most of my production work can be done remotely," Michael explained. "I've arranged to transfer my guitar students to colleagues, and I've already contacted some local venues about performance opportunities." He glanced at Elaine. "I'm committed to making this work." Elaine's expression remained neutral, but she nodded slightly in acknowledgement of the significant step Michael was taking. The following weekend, Marcus helped Michael move into his new apartment, a modest 1-bedroom unit with large windows and good acoustics. The walls were soon lined with guitars, amplifiers, and framed concert posters from Michael's touring days. "This one was my first major show," Michael explained, pointing to a faded poster advertising a music festival from 20 years earlier. "Your mother came to see us play, even though she claimed to hate our cacophonous noise, as she called it." Marcus smiled at this new glimpse into his parents' past. Each story, each memory shared, helped him piece together the puzzle of who he was and where he came from. As January turned to February, they settled into a new routine. Marcus spent Tuesdays and Thursdays after school at Michael's apartment for guitar lessons and dinner, while weekends remained dedicated to his life with Elaine. Michael began performing acoustic sets at local coffee shops and small venues, sometimes inviting Marcus to watch from the back row. One evening, as they worked through a particularly challenging guitar piece, Marcus gathered the courage to ask the question that had been nagging at him. "Did you know that Grandpa Joseph found you before he died?" Michael's fingers stilled on the strings, his expression turning solemn. "Yes. He called me about 2 years ago." "Why didn't you mention that when you first came?" Marcus asked, unable to keep the hint of accusation from his voice. Michael set his guitar aside, giving Marcus his full attention. It was a brief, difficult conversation. Joseph told me that Catherine had passed away several years earlier. He asked a few questions about where I'd been, what I'd been doing. He seemed, I don't know, like he was evaluating me in some way. "He was," Marcus confirmed, remembering the journal entries. "He was trying to decide whether to tell you about me." Michael's expression crumpled slightly. "I wish he had." "Why didn't you tell me about this when you first arrived?" Michael sighed deeply. "I was afraid it would make you think less of me, that Joseph had judged me and found me wanting, that he'd decided I didn't deserve to know about you." A few days later, Elaine revealed another piece of the puzzle during dinner. "Your grandfather did more than just speak to Michael on the phone," she said carefully. "According to his journal, he actually met with Michael in person once, about a month before Joseph found you at St. Catherine's." Marcus looked up in surprise. "He never mentioned that." "Dad was very methodical about everything," Elaine explained. "He wanted to assess Michael face to face before making any decisions about whether to tell him about you." "And he decided not to," Marcus concluded, a heaviness settling in his chest. "Not exactly," Elaine clarified. "According to his journal, he felt that finding you had to come first. He wrote that everything needed to happen in the right order. First reuniting you with your remaining family, then introducing the idea of your father once you were settled." "But he ran out of time," Marcus said quietly. Elaine nodded sadly. "The cancer progressed much faster than anyone expected. In those final weeks, all his energy was focused on spending time with you, even if you didn't know who he really was." The next day, Marcus confronted Michael about the meeting with Joseph. "Why didn't you tell me that you actually met with my grandfather?" he demanded as soon as he arrived at Michael's apartment. Michael looked genuinely startled. "How did you—" "Elaine found it in his journal," Marcus interrupted. "You met with him in person and you never mentioned it." Michael sank onto the couch, running a hand through his curls in the gesture Marcus had come to recognize as a sign of distress. "It wasn't my place," he finally said. "Joseph asked me not to interfere, to let things unfold as he had planned. He said he needed time to prepare you, that you'd already experienced too much upheaval." "So you knew about me then?" Marcus persisted. "No," Michael answered firmly. "Joseph told me he had important family matters to discuss, but he never mentioned you specifically. He asked about my life, my stability, whether I'd changed my nomadic ways. Looking back, I realize he was assessing whether I'd be a suitable father, but at the time, it seemed like the curious interrogation of Catherine's protective father." As March approached, bringing warmer days and the first hints of spring, the three of them, Marcus, Elaine, and Michael, had established an uneasy peace. Yet beneath the surface, Marcus felt increasingly torn between his two worlds. Elaine represented safety, stability, and the connection to his mother and Joseph. Michael offered glimpses into another part of his identity, his musical talent, his temperament, the physical traits he'd inherited. The pressure of trying to balance these relationships, of trying to please everyone while still processing his own complex emotions, began to weigh heavily on Marcus. The breaking point came during a dinner at Elaine's house where Michael had been invited. The conversation had turned to plans for the summer, with Elaine mentioning a 2-week history camp she thought Marcus might enjoy, while Michael suggested a weekend music festival where they could perform together. "That sounds wonderful," Marcus said automatically in response to both suggestions, not wanting to disappoint either adult. "But they're the same weekend," Elaine pointed out gently. "You'd have to choose." Something inside Marcus snapped. The pressure of being caught between these two worlds, of carrying the weight of everyone's expectations and unresolved histories, suddenly felt unbearable. "I don't want to choose," he exclaimed, pushing back from the table. "I'm tired of being stuck in the middle, of hearing stories about people I never got to know, of trying to figure out who I'm supposed to be." Before either adult could respond, Marcus bolted from the house, ignoring their calls. Without conscious thought, his feet carried him toward the one place he associated with peace, the cemetery where Joseph was buried. The spring evening was chilly as dusk settled over the rows of headstones. Marcus made his way directly to Joseph's grave, dropping to his knees on the damp grass. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered to the headstone. "Everyone wants something from me, and I don't know how to be everything to everyone." Tears began to fall freely as Marcus released the emotional turmoil he'd been suppressing. "I wish you were here to help me figure this out. You always knew what to say." He wasn't sure how long he sat there, pouring out his confusion to the silent stone, but the sound of approaching footsteps eventually broke through his distress. Looking up, he was surprised to see both Elaine and Michael approaching together, concern etched on their faces. "We've been looking everywhere for you," Elaine said, relief evident in her voice. "We were worried," Michael added, his expression solemn. Something about seeing them together, united in their concern for him, despite their differences, broke the final barrier around Marcus's heart. A fresh wave of tears overtook him, and without hesitation, both adults moved forward, enveloping him in a joint embrace that spoke more eloquently than words about their shared priority: his well-being. "I'm sorry," Marcus managed between sobs. "I just felt so overwhelmed." "No, we're sorry," Elaine said, her own voice thick with emotion. "We've been so focused on our own feelings, on what we want for you, that we haven't been listening to what you need." As they walked back to the car together, Marcus felt emotionally drained, but somehow lighter. That night, as he prepared for bed, he noticed something he'd overlooked before: a small compartment hidden within the antique pocket watch Joseph had left him. Inside was a final message, written in his grandfather's elegant script: "Build bridges, not walls. Family is what we build together." That night, as Marcus lay in bed reflecting on the turbulent day, an idea began to form. He sat up suddenly, reaching for the notebook on his bedside table. "What if we spend Christmas together this year? The three of us. Like a family, even if it's a different kind of family." Elaine and Michael exchanged surprised glances at Marcus's proposal. The suggestion hung in the air for a moment before they both nodded, tentative smiles forming on their faces. "I think that would be wonderful," Elaine said, her voice softening as she looked at Michael. "I'd like that very much," Michael agreed, the tension in his shoulders visibly relaxing. In the following days, Marcus's suggestion sparked a flurry of activity as Christmas preparations began. Though it was only early April, the promise of a shared holiday gave them something positive to focus on, a future moment they could build toward together. One crisp Saturday morning, Elaine suggested they search the attic for the family Christmas decorations. As Marcus climbed the narrow stairs behind her, she explained, "Your grandfather had specific traditions. He and your mother would pick out a tree together every year, even after they had their falling out. It was the one day they set aside their differences." Marcus helped her pull down several boxes labeled Christmas in Joseph's neat handwriting. "Did you do it too? Pick out trees with them?" "Sometimes," Elaine replied, a wistful smile crossing her face. when I wasn't away at college or later, caught up in my own life." She paused, running her fingers along the edge of a cardboard box. I wish I'd made more time for those moments now. As they sorted through ornaments and tangled strands of lights, Marcus found himself imagining a Christmas with both Elaine and Michael present. Not the fragmented celebrations he'd known at the orphanage, but something whole, even if unconventional. Later that week, Michael arrived with several boxes of his own, dust-covered and slightly worn at the corners. "I found these in my storage unit," he explained as he set them down in Elaine's living room. "Decorations from when your mother and I were together. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away, even after all these years." Marcus helped open the first box, gasping softly when he saw the contents. Inside were handmade ornaments, tiny guitars made from popsicle sticks, miniature violins crafted from clay, each one painted with care. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a small clay star with C+M etched into its surface. "Your mother made these," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "She said store-bought decorations had no soul." The three of them spent the afternoon going through Michael's boxes, each item unleashing a new story. Another glimpse into the past that had created Marcus. They laughed at photos of Michael with a terrible 90s haircut, grew quiet over a pressed flower Catherine had saved from their first date, and marveled at concert tickets and programs that chronicled the early days of their relationship. Something shifted that day, a subtle but unmistakable change in the atmosphere when all three were together. The cautious politeness that had characterized their early interactions began to give way to something more genuine, more familial. As April gave way to May, Marcus spent increasing time at Michael's apartment, secretly working on a special project. Under Michael's guidance, he was learning to compose his own music, crafting a piece that incorporated elements of the classical melodies his mother had loved. "Your fingers are getting stronger," Michael observed one afternoon as Marcus practiced a particularly challenging sequence. "You're a natural, just like Catherine was." Marcus smiled at the comparison, no longer feeling the pang of loss that had once accompanied mentions of his mother. Instead, these connections to her felt like gifts, pieces of himself previously unknown that were finally falling into place. From the living room window, Marcus could see Elaine's car pulling into the parking lot. She had started picking him up from Michael's apartment, rather than having Michael drive him home, a small but significant gesture toward co-parenting. "I should finish my homework before Elaine arrives," Marcus said, carefully placing his guitar on its stand. Michael nodded, then hesitated. "I noticed Elaine mentioned a recital at your school next month. Would it be all right if I attended too?" The question was posed casually, but Marcus could hear the underlying uncertainty. Michael was still navigating his place in this new family constellation, still unsure of his welcome at events Elaine would naturally attend. "I'd like that," Marcus replied simply. "I think Elaine would too." When Elaine arrived, Marcus was surprised to see her lingering in conversation with Michael, rather than simply collecting him as she usually did. He watched from the hallway as they spoke, heads bent together over what appeared to be a calendar, their expressions serious but not antagonistic. "We were discussing summer plans," Elaine explained on the drive home. "Trying to work out a schedule that gives you time with both of us without making you feel pulled in different directions." Marcus felt a surge of gratitude at their efforts to coordinate, rather than compete. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Michael's trying," Elaine acknowledged, her tone more generous than it had been in early conversations about him. "He rearranged his entire teaching schedule to be available when you're not in school." As spring progressed, Marcus continued his clandestine music project with Michael, while also helping Elaine prepare for the coming holidays. One afternoon, while searching through a box of Christmas ornaments in the attic, he discovered another of Joseph's hidden treasures, a small chest containing handcrafted ornaments his mother had made as a child. "I remember these," Elaine said with a catch in her voice when Marcus brought them downstairs. Catherine made them in elementary school. Dad kept every single one. Each ornament bore a date and Catherine's childish signature. Marcus handled them reverently, these tangible connections to a mother he barely remembered. Among them was a small clay star, similar to the one Michael had kept. But this one bore a different inscription. For Dad, with love. She made one for Joseph, too, Marcus observed, comparing the two stars in his mind. Catherine always created from her heart, Elaine said softly. Even when their relationship was strained, she never stopped loving him. One warm afternoon in early June, Elaine invited Marcus into the kitchen where the counters were spread with flour and baking supplies. I thought we might try making Christmas cookies, she suggested, with a slightly self-conscious smile. These were your grandmother's recipes. Catherine and I used to help make them every December. Marcus tied on the apron she offered, watching carefully as Elaine demonstrated how to roll the dough to the perfect thickness. As they worked side by side, cutting shapes and carefully transferring them to baking sheets, Elaine shared stories of Christmases past. Catherine sneaking raw cookie dough when their mother wasn't looking, Joseph insisting on precise decorating techniques, the whole family gathered in the kitchen with flour-dusted faces and laughter filling the air. Later that week, during his regular visit to Michael's apartment, his father shared his own Christmas memories. Your mother loved Christmas music, he said, as they worked on their secret composition. She used to drag me to midnight church services just to hear the choir. She said there was something magical about voices harmonizing in the darkness. Marcus absorbed these stories eagerly, weaving them into the melody he was creating, a bridge between his parents' separate pasts and his own emerging future. One evening, as Marcus and Theo sprawled across Marcus's bedroom floor, working on a summer reading assignment, their conversation drifted to the upcoming holidays. So your dad's really sticking around? Theo asked, chewing thoughtfully on a pencil eraser. It's been what? 3 months now. Almost 4, Marcus corrected. And yeah, I think he is. He's even talking about renewing his lease when it expires next month. That's cool, Theo said with genuine enthusiasm. And your aunt's okay with everything now? Marcus considered the question. It's complicated, he admitted. But they're both trying really hard. They're planning Christmas together, coordinating who gets which days during summer break. It's kind of like having divorced parents, except they were never married. Theo nodded, understanding in his eyes. You're building something new from the pieces, right? Like when my uncle first took me in. It wasn't like having my parents back, but it became its own good thing eventually. Marcus smiled at his friend's insight. Exactly. It's different, but maybe different can be good too. As summer arrived in full force, Marcus found himself occasionally overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. While grateful for the family he'd discovered, there were moments when the weight of absence struck him anew. His mother, whom he'd never truly known. Joseph, whose time with him had been so cruelly brief. One evening, Elaine found him sitting quietly on his bed, looking at old Christmas photos of his mother. I miss her, Marcus said simply, though the truth was more complex. How could he truly miss someone he barely remembered? And sometimes I feel guilty. Guilty? Elaine asked, sitting beside him. Why? For being happy now, Marcus admitted, the words difficult to express. When she's not here, when Grandpa Joseph isn't here. Sometimes it feels wrong to enjoy things with you and Michael when they never got to see us all together. Elaine placed a gentle arm around his shoulders. Joseph would have wanted this exact outcome, she said with certainty. He spent his final months engineering precisely this situation. You, connected to family, building relationships that would sustain you. Your happiness would have been his greatest joy. As Marcus worked on the final touches of his secret musical composition, he had a vivid dream. In it, he sat at a piano in an empty concert hall, struggling with a difficult passage. Suddenly, Joseph appeared beside him, not sick and frail as Marcus had known him, but strong and vibrant. His grandfather placed his hands over Marcus's, guiding his fingers across the keys, nodding with approval as the correct notes flowed forth. When Marcus awoke, the memory of the dream remained unusually clear. He felt a certainty that Joseph was still guiding him, still helping him connect the scattered pieces of his heritage into something whole and beautiful. The coming of Christmas was still months away, but Marcus had already prepared 3 small presents, each chosen with care. For Elaine, he'd found a vintage edition of her favorite historical novel. For Michael, he'd carefully restored an old vinyl record mentioned in one of his mother's letters. And for himself, though he wouldn't wrap this one, he'd created space in his heart to receive the gift of this unconventional family with all its complexities and imperfections. On Christmas morning, Marcus woke with a start, suddenly remembering something from Joseph's journal, a mention of one final treasure, described as the most important of all that he had yet to discover. Marcus bolted upright in bed, his heart racing. The gray Christmas morning light filtered through his curtains as he reached for Joseph's journal on his nightstand. He flipped through the pages he'd read countless times before, searching for the passage that had suddenly surfaced in his dreams. There it was, a brief mention buried in an entry from Joseph's final weeks. "I've hidden the most important treasure of all where it will be safe until Marcus is ready to understand its true value." Marcus slipped out of bed, pulling on his robe and slippers. The house was quiet. Elaine wouldn't be up for at least another hour. He began searching his room methodically, examining the baseboards, checking inside books, running his fingers along the edges of his furniture. Nothing. He sat on the edge of his bed, frustrated. What had Joseph meant? Where would he hide something of great importance? Marcus pulled out the pocket watch, turning it over in his hands as he'd done countless times before. The familiar inscription, "Time reveals truth," caught the early morning light. Suddenly, Marcus noticed something he'd overlooked. A tiny seam along the inner rim of the watch case that didn't match the craftsmanship of the rest. He pressed gently with his thumbnail, and to his astonishment, a small compartment popped open. Inside was a minuscule folded paper, creased so many times it was barely larger than a postage stamp. With trembling fingers, Marcus carefully unfolded it, revealing a set of coordinates followed by a simple instruction: "Beneath the winter rose where promises begin." The winter rose. Marcus immediately knew what it meant. In Joseph's garden there was an antique bench beneath a climbing rose bush that Joseph had called his winter beauty, because it bloomed even in the coldest months. Marcus had helped Elaine prune it just last week, preparing it for the holiday season. He dressed quickly and crept downstairs, careful not to wake Elaine. In the kitchen he could hear faint sounds. Michael was already there, preparing coffee and what smelled like cinnamon rolls. "You're up early," Michael observed with a smile that dimmed when he saw Marcus's intense expression. "Everything okay?" "I need to check something in the garden," Marcus replied, already heading toward the back door, grabbing his coat from the hook. Michael set down the spatula he was holding. "Want company?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. Together they stepped into the crisp morning air, their breath forming small clouds as they crossed the frost-covered lawn to the garden bench. "My grandfather hid something here," Marcus explained, kneeling in the cold earth. "His last treasure." Understanding dawned on Michael's face. He'd heard all about Joseph's elaborate treasure hunt over the past months. Without a word, he knelt beside Marcus, helping him clear away dead leaves and loosen the soil near the bench's foundation. After several minutes of careful digging, Marcus's fingers struck something solid, a small metal box, weatherproofed and sealed. His heart pounding, he brushed away the remaining soil and lifted it out. "Should we take it inside?" Michael asked quietly. Marcus shook his head. I want to open it here. This is where Joseph used to sit and think. He carefully unlatched the box, revealing a sealed envelope inside, protected by waterproof material. On the front, in Joseph's elegant handwriting, was simply written, "For Marcus, the greatest treasure." As Marcus reached for the envelope, the back door opened, and Elaine appeared, wrapped in her bathrobe. "What are you two doing out here in the cold?" she called, hurrying toward them. When she spotted the box, her steps slowed. "You found it," she whispered. "The last one." "You knew about it?" Marcus asked, surprised. Elaine shook her head. "Not specifically, but Dad mentioned there was one final message he'd hidden somewhere special. He said you'd find it when the time was right." The three of them moved to the kitchen, where Michael's cinnamon rolls were beginning to brown in the oven. Marcus placed the envelope on the table, still hesitant to open it. "Whatever's in there," Elaine said gently, "Joseph meant it as a gift, not a burden." Marcus nodded and carefully broke the seal. Inside was a letter, several pages long, and a small key that he didn't recognize. "My dearest Marcus," the letter began in Joseph's familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this, then you've followed the path I laid out for you, discovering your family history, piece by piece, at a pace that allowed you to absorb each revelation." Marcus read aloud, his voice steady despite the emotion building in his chest. "Throughout my life, I've accumulated possessions, achievements, and memories. When facing death, I've discovered that material legacies mean little compared to the connections between those we love. My greatest regret was the time lost with my daughters through stubbornness and pride, time I could never recover. In searching for you, I hope to correct at least one of my life's failures, to ensure that what remained of our family could find each other again. But I realized that simply bringing you to Elaine wasn't enough. Family isn't just about blood ties or legal guardianship. It's about building bridges between hearts that might otherwise remain separated. The treasures I've left for you were never about the objects themselves. They were breadcrumbs leading you to understand who you are and where you come from. But this final treasure is different. It's not about the past, but about the future you will build. The key enclosed opens a small safe deposit box at First National Bank. Inside, you'll find legal documents establishing a trust for your education, letters I've written to you for future milestones I won't witness, and a few personal items I hope will bring you comfort in difficult times. But the true treasure isn't in that box. It's in the relationships you're building right now. With Elaine, who has more strength and love to give than even she realizes. With others who may enter your life, perhaps even your father, should paths cross. And with the memory of your mother, whose love for you was boundless. Remember this always. Family is not something we inherit like an heirloom. It's something we build daily through choices, forgiveness, and love. Some connections are forged by blood, others by circumstance, but all require tending to flourish. My time with you was brief, but it was one of my life's greatest blessings. Know that wherever you go, whatever you become, you carry with you not just the Williams bloodline, but the love of those who came before you. With all my heart, your grandfather, Joseph. By the time Marcus finished reading, tears streamed down his face. Elaine was wiping her eyes, and even Michael looked away, emotion evident in his profile. "He knew," Marcus said softly. "Somehow he knew everything that would happen, even about you, Michael. He was preparing me all along." Elaine reached across the table, taking Marcus's hand. "Dad always saw further than the rest of us." They spent the morning exchanging gifts, simple, thoughtful presents that reflected their growing understanding of one another. Elaine unwrapped the vintage book from Marcus with genuine delight, while Michael was visibly moved by the restored vinyl record that Catherine had once mentioned in her letters. When Marcus opened Elaine's gift, a handcrafted photo album Combining old family photographs with new memories they'd created together, he felt a fullness in his heart that seemed almost too big to contain. After breakfast, as they cleared away wrapping paper, Marcus disappeared briefly into his room, returning with his guitar. "I've been working on something," he said shyly, "with Michael's help. It's for both of you." He settled onto the piano bench, positioning his fingers on the strings. The melody that emerged was hauntingly beautiful. Elements of classical structure that would have pleased his mother, interwoven with more contemporary flourishes that reflected Michael's influence. But the composition itself was uniquely Marcus, a bridge between his inherited talents and his own emerging voice. As the final notes faded, he looked up to find both Elaine and Michael watching him with identical expressions of pride and wonder. "That was beautiful," Elaine whispered. "Your mother would have loved it," Michael added, his voice thick with emotion. Later that afternoon, they visited Joseph's grave together, placing a wreath of winter roses against the headstone. Marcus set a framed photograph in front of it, a picture Theo had taken of the three of them at Marcus's school concert, all smiling despite the initial awkwardness of their first public appearance as a family unit. "Thank you," Marcus whispered to the stone, "for everything." 1 year later, on the anniversary of Joseph's death, the changes in their lives were evident. Michael had renewed his lease, continuing to build his teaching practice locally while maintaining his production work. Elaine had gradually opened her heart, not just to Marcus, but to the possibility of this unconventional family arrangement. And Marcus had flourished, his musical talents developing alongside his academic interests, his friendship with Theo deepening into brotherhood. As Marcus stood alone by Joseph's grave on that crisp winter morning, he realized how completely his life had transformed in 2 short years. From an orphan with no known family to the center of a loving, if unconventional, family circle. "I understand now," he said softly to the headstone. "Your real legacy wasn't your name or your possessions. It was making sure I knew I was never alone, and never would be." He placed a small handmade ornament, a clay star he'd crafted himself, against the stone. Inscribed on it were the initials of everyone in his expanded family, connected by a delicate line. As he walked back to where Elaine and Michael waited in the car, Marcus realized that Joseph's true legacy continued to live not just in memories or hidden treasures, but in each daily choice to love. Proof that some prayers, even after so much time, are finally answered.